couple of little boys, Jack and Colton, and they love to come into my office. And in my office there's a little box, and you turn the crank the little box, it makes music, and then they crank, and all of a sudden, boop, and there's Jack in the box. And that's how I often feel on Sunday mornings, like, I turn the crank, I'm not quite sure what's going to pop up or when it's going to pop up. And this down to think about how does your garden grow, and the underlying theme is, how's creation doing? How's God's good gift getting along under our human jurisdiction? Now the texts that we had today are about, as Judy said, feeding people. And Jesus is feeding people. He's feeding them on two levels. The most important level is that he is feeding them spiritually. You can have a full table and still be hungry inside for something. You can have an empty table and still be full inside because of something. The proverb in the book of Proverbs says, better peace with bread than fighting with a banquet. What I would like to make clear is that the text speaks to us not, in the first place, about the supernatural power of Jesus. That's the impression we get, and that's the story that has been told for many generations. But the story is not about supernatural things. The story is what we might call a parable, a way of talking that allows the listeners to get an insight. And the question is, what insight can we find in this story about Jesus feeding 5,000 hungry people? Well, a theologian by the name of Walter Brueggemann, who means a fair bit to me, suggested that the story is basically about the goodness of creation and the sufficiency of creation, the abundance of creation. And he goes on to suggest that the trouble is we as human beings keep living as if there was scarcity. So rather than every day say, thank you, God, for my bread today, we say, dear God, please give me enough bread for tomorrow and the next day and the day after, and please keep me fed until I die. In other words, we have become anxious about there being enough. Now for us as people in a very privileged station of life in the affluent middle class of the Western world, this might sound a little bit odd. We're not hungry for food. But we are hungry for the presence of God. We are hungry for the certainty that we are loved. We are hungry for confidence to go and share that love with our neighbors. And in this story, Jesus feeds the people with bread. I have a little theory about where the bread may have come from, by the way. Jesus was a friend of all kinds of scoundrels, including some outlaws. And I suspect that there may have been a party planned in Herod's house when some outlaws robbed the camel train. And he took the bread and he brought it to Jesus and said, look, we got all this bread. Can you do anything with it? This happens at the food bank all the time. And Jesus said, sure, let's just hide it behind this hill. Now, I don't want to take away from the story. But what I want to suggest is that the way the world is, the way God made the world, is good, and that goodness is freely available to all people, but something has gone wrong. And that's why Jesus tells this story about the boat on the sea. It's a representation of the citizens of earth in a boat on a sea. That is to say, we live on this planet, and we recognize that things are getting really shaky and troubled and disturbed. And we're asking, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And then we look and we notice Jesus walking across the water, across the chaos, across the confusion, approaching us. And when we welcome Jesus into the boat, he pronounces remarkable words. Don't be afraid. It's me. I'm with you. And that's Jesus saying that God, at the heart of any circumstance, is present to us as a resource, as a strength that we can draw on. And in fact, we might consider it to be like an ever-ready battery. As long as you're attached to the battery, you're going to have energy for life. But the moment you detach from the battery, that energy is going to be diminished. And right now, in many ways, the human race is experiencing a languish, a wondering what's going to happen. Where will the good come from? And what I'd like to suggest is that Jesus tells the story about the goodness of creation, the troubles of human experience, so that we might turn away from our resistance to how God gets things done. And when I say the word God, I would like you to picture a question mark. I would like you to go home and say, what on earth does the pastor mean when he says the word God? I would like you to take the image of God that you have off the shelf, wherever you keep it safe, put it in the center of your life somewhere, and look at it. And say, is this image of God that I have sufficient for our need? One of the hardest things that I hear from people is, how can a good God allow all this evil? Well, that's a bit of a dodge. God has not allowed this evil. God is deeply sad about this evil. God is deeply sad about what's going on in the human race. God is deeply sad about the fact that some have so much and some have so little. So God sends the Spirit into the world to animate persons. And those persons begin to do the evangelical work, the sharing of good news. Don't worry. God is with you. You are not alone. And that's a task that each one of us can carry into our daily experience. Wherever we are, whatever we do, we can bring God's love. Is there a requirement? Perhaps. And the question that the children are asking, how does your garden grow, is perhaps the most important question of all. How is your soul doing? And your soul is like a garden. The garden represents a place that needs to be cultivated. In your soul, you need to have good seed growing, the seed of peace, the seed of joy, the seed of patience. But as you live your life, other seeds come into that. The seeds of fear, the seeds of doubt, the seeds of worry, the seeds of anxiety, the seeds of envy and resentment. They come in, and then we can't really separate the good from the bad. But what I would like you to do is to take time in your life to not just celebrate the religious ceremonies that are represented by this table. These are good for us. They help us. But this is not why we are here. We do not come to this table so that somehow God will be happy with us. We come to this table because this is where God symbolically gives us his life. And when we take it, we eat it, we take it, we drink it, and God's love becomes our life in exactly the way that our daily diets become our physical bodies. So as we begin to move into our communion, I would like you very much to be open to the possibility of having your life changed. And not just for the sake of change, but for the sake of this sad world which so much hungers for change. One of the nice things about working at the composting bin is you get to meet folks. And yesterday a young man rode up on a bicycle with a bag of yard clippings. And I just chatted, but I realized he didn't speak English very well. Then he came back with 2 bags of yard clippings. And then he came back with Esther, who is sitting here, with his brother, and a little fellow, Abdul Latif, a little boy. And these folk were from Syria. And they didn't speak language, but it was just thrilling for me to think that Esther was their neighbor, and then Esther took time to help them get some grass clippings in the car and bring them to the composter. That's the gospel of Jesus Christ. Everything that you do for somebody else fills you up with more love. But if you just sit there and think, oh, I wish I had love. Oh, I wish I had love. Oh, I wish I had love. Oh, why don't I have love? Why don't I have love? It's because you're not giving it away. And giving it away is exceptionally simple. And if you give it away seriously, it could get interesting. It could get to be an adventure. And maybe I'll close off with a little phrase from the book called The Hobbit. And I don't know if any of you have read the Tolkien stories. They're, again, parables told to his grandchildren first to help them to discover the resources that they needed to live a good life. But the one thing which I think will apply to many, many people in the Christian church about hobbits is that they don't care for adventure very much. And when Gandalf comes to invite them out of where they are and into this adventure of saving the world from Sauron, the power that is abusing and spoiling it, they discover something about themselves that is very, very precious. And there's something about you, each one of you, that is very, very precious. And I trust that God, by his grace, will strengthen that precious thing and give you the liberty to allow it to run over into all of your relationships. That you begin to take the love of God in a new way, not as religion, but as life. The life that you live with your family, your friends, and your neighbors. And in that way, we'll move a little bit away from the institutional church. But I suspect we'll move a little bit closer to the one who's no longer in the tomb, but who's alive among us, in us,